My name's Erin. I'm here to talk to you about writing command line applications. I talk about it as the client side because we often do things from client side. So I'm a developer of things at Red Hat. I was at IBM for 21 years. I'm a Java champion, recently a distinguished engineer. I play Dungeons and Dragons with my sister. I used to play it with my kids, but they do it themselves now, and I'm glad to have it be so. I build ridiculous things. Holly is here. Everybody say hi, Holly. She has built ridiculous things with me over years. So when we talk about command line applications, any of us that have used Linux for a long time, we know all of our command line applications. Some of them are local. They just do the local thing. But we use a lot of them that are clients for remote things. The ones we probably use every day now are Git and Docker, kubectl, kubectl. Who says cuddle and who says... There was a huge Twitter... Did anybody see the Twitter rage debate the other day about how you pronounce acronyms? It was pretty funny. Lots of opinions. Anyway, when we're talking about command line apps, if we talk about what makes a good one, the ones we like versus the ones we loathe, there's a bunch of things that you have to think about, maybe a little differently, for a good command line. Sane defaults. You want it to basically like work most of the time with the least amount of typing. So what is the sane default? Do you know? Are your verbs, your actions clear? Is it easy for someone who's using your CLI? Almost all of the CLIs that we use these days have multiple actions. Git has tons of them, right? And most of them are actually pretty sound verbs. You know what they are. You know what they do. You know what they're for. Some of them you really want to adventure with, like cherry pick. I want to know what that does. Who felt like a ninja when they figured out cherry pick? I'm not to bisect yet. Who's to get bisect? Who knows what that does? Oh, good. Brave souls. I will come and bother you when I'm confused. The other one is there's conventions that we like, that everybody is... How many people have typed -H on a Windows command line and been like... Conventions, right? They make typing habit easy, even in this era of tab complete. Right? You want to make it easy for your users. At this point, we are to the place where your CLI should probably use emoji. It's so cool. But we know that people don't always, they have colors and text and you can use all the things. And at this point, I think plenty of engineers are having a lot of fun trying to decide if they should use the rocket ship or the beer or which emoji is the one for yes. There's so many choices. But the point is you should use them, and they're visual indicators, right? So people get the idea. Is this something I have to pay attention to? Is it something I can ignore? These are all things that can help you create a CLI that people enjoy using, that is intuitive for them. Badass CLIs play well with others. When we're talking about Linux and you're piping commands, right? That means where your output happens. I mean, some of this is not rocket science. We have been writing things like this forever. Your return codes should be intelligible. Holly, you tweeted just the other day about the return codes, did you not? Yeah. Everybody agrees that 0 is okay, but whatever the other ones mean, there's no real convention. But you can ascribe a lot of meaning to them, which, if any of us have been around long enough, we know that once we make a command line application and then someone uses the command line application, the next step that they do is they script it. And they include it in some other scripty thing. Oh, it did it again? No, don't do that. I'm not sharing anymore. Take this off. We'll let it come back. So anyway, we know what our command line applications should do and how they should work. There goes my brains, whatever. We'll just say, we'll figure it out. Is it back? Yes. There's my brains. So if I don't have any anymore, you know why. We'll figure it out. So we're going to make a CLI today. And part of why I had my brains offloaded is because I wanted to try to make a CLI app that is a little more complicated than a hello. And that means I have to kind of bootstrap my way into things, right? I want to try to get there without you guys having to watch me type for hours because let's face it, who wants to watch anybody type? Nobody wants to watch that. So I actually have a repo that has 10 branches in it. So we will fast forward in time. We will make some jumps. I I told you earlier, I gave you the fair warning, I make ridiculous things. I decided to play Dungeons and Dragons with my sister. She's awesome. I love my sister. She's great. When you're playing Dungeons and Dragons, one of the things you end up having is you have a lot of loot. And you like to keep track of it and know how much it is and work with quantities and coins and all the kinds of things that are annoying. And I have, there's lots of tools for it. I'm like, I need to write a CLI. Hey, I know. I can write one for loot. We'll do that. So I have an idea of loot, but this is Erin making ridiculous things. I always do this. So that's what we're going to do today. We're going to make an inventory manager for your Dungeons and Dragons loot. Are we excited now? Yes, you should totally be excited. We're going to use Pico CLI for it, which gives you lots of annotations and fun things to help make CLIs easier, both to create. It does a lot of things for you. We'll go through what some of these are. There are programmatic equivalents for all of these, but the annotations are nicely decoupled so you can really structure your code, bring it together, that kind of thing. It brings out of the box, for example, if I use Pico CLI, I already have a help command that follows conventions and shows me usage, and more than that, as we'll see. It includes all of the content, so I don't even have to worry about rendering the whole thing. I just give it some strings and it makes it pretty for me. It also creates conventions already for me for some of those exit codes. It'll always return true 0 if it's okay, and it'll return 1 if I screw something up. If there's some random exception, it'll return 1 for me. And if the user, my sister, obviously, if she types in something wrong, it'll return 2. So I've already got a nice convention for what return code should come back, and I get that for free, which is a bonus. I'm going to talk a little bit, you guys should all be aware of JBang and JReleaser if you're not. I'm not going to cover JReleaser at all, but JReleaser is useful for anybody doing any kind of library. CLI is just one flavor. So it helps you release them, like if you make a CLI that's a runnable jar with a script or whatever, it'll help you release, make the brew install and the chocolatey install and the blah, 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 like it'll do the whole thing. Now with JBang, the reason I enjoy it, and I have a little clip here of it installing the Quarkus CLI, but the important part is like downloaded file from that big long Maven repo string. So my sister can totally manage a JBang app install. For me, I'm writing this CLI. I am not going to put it in Maven Central. I'm making ridiculous things. I'm going to put it in Jetpack. She can still use JBang, and it'll do all the scripty, rappy stuff. She doesn't have to. She barely knows Python. So Maven is beyond what she's going to want to do to use my CLI, but she can do JBang and install it, and then it'll see Quarkus version it'll just behave like another shell script, but it was Java, and she doesn't need to know that. So that's why you should know what JBang is. It's really nice if you want to use Java to do. For the record, full disclosure, I've also written CLIs to do, Dungeons and Dragons data conversion from XML to JSON things and markdown things, because of course that's what normal humans do on their weekends. And I use this JBang to allow that to be installed for, random people on the internet who also like to do that on their spare time on the weekends. There is more than just me, I swear. This is an example of how you can use the Quarkus CLI to create a project. It's not particularly rocket science or interesting, but it's an example of this Quarkus CLI itself is written both in Quarkus and with Pico CLI. It is, and I'm using that to create a CLI project. It's a little meta, but that's how we create a project. That project, for a lot of Quarkus applications, has some default files in it for initial project structure. And we have dev mode, which we'll show in a second. It runs continuously. I can do all my tests as it's going. That's what we will be doing today. We will be letting Quarkus dev mode run in the background, basically. That's my cue. I should be typing. Okay, so what we're going to do here, notice it says DN. Oh, you can't see. It's purple. Doesn't matter. It says DN1 up there. That means it's the start of the world. So we'll start Quarkus dev. Is it still small? And now it's flickering. My sound is flickering. Better? Can you guys read it? Okay, something happened with the resolution a couple times. So Quarkus dev mode's running. You can see a little message in there. Oh, I should add. Because I want my sister to run this, I want it to run using a local file as the database eventually. So I'm making a choice that it's going to use Hibernate with a file backend, because that way it can just live on her machine and I don't have to pay cloud costs for just us checking inventory for our silly game that we play on the weekends. So that means I have a trade-off because Hibernate embedded in embedded mode doesn't compile to native. I'm okay with that. My sister doesn't care that it's not a native binary. She's just not even going to pay attention. But just for the record, aside from the Hibernate, aside from the H2 is what I'm using. Aside from my usage of H2, anything else that I'm doing here will work fine in native mode. So I'm making a trade-off specifically so that it'll run for my sister. So you can see dev mode started. Here, I gotta get it a little smaller. It really messed with my resolution. That's funny. I'm going to turn on test output and I'm just going to tell it to resume testing, but you'll notice, oh, no tests found. Well, I knew that. I didn't have any yet. So we have out of the box a very small, this is the generated CLI with the exception that I've renamed it because we are creating an application named Pockets because we want to know what we have in our pockets. That's what comes out of the box. So I'm just going to jump ahead a little bit. And here's what we're going to do next. So what I've added, some things that we do with Quarkus commands. Top command. Now, if you're using Spring, for the record, we can do the same very similar thing that we're going to do here with Quarkus. So there's a Spring starter for Pico CLI, which sets up auto configuration and does some connection between, come on, stop doing that to me. It does some integration connection between Spring and Spring DI, Spring Bean lifecycle methods. And why are you doing this to me? You're just trying to give me a heart attack. Stop it. All right, fixed. So Spring has a starter that has an auto configuration and it has another bean that binds the factory so that the life cycle of the Pico CLI objects and stuff is tied in with the Spring DI model. Quarkus does a similar thing, which is what's happening here. So the top command is part of the Quarkus Pico CLI extension. So it's starting to create some Pico CLI objects in the background to help tie all those life cycles together. This will run my whole command. Notice I don't have anything that says static void main. Right? Quarkus is doing magic. Spring has very similar magic that will do similar things to link those together. I'm going to jump ahead again because I don't even remember what I'm doing anymore and my brains are over there. So we're going to jump ahead. So one of the things we want to do eventually, I want my sister, you'll see I've got tests passing underneath. So I added some tests somewhere along the way. We've done a few things now. I have now made this a Quarkus main. There's reasons. We have a command. We've named it Pockets. We've shown what we have in our pockets. There's some interesting things to note here. We have a scope type, which is inherit. And if you notice over here on files, I've got create, delete, edit, list. I've got like a CRUD set of verbs for my sister to use to add things to her pocket. And that scope type inherit will mean that from this main command that I have, any options that I set here will just apply to all of those subcommands, so I don't have to type all that stuff all the time. It'll just cascade down. I have created, for those of you that write, okay, how many of you have ever written a command line utility ever of any kind, even in like Bash? Okay, how many times did you end up trying to write enough output that you ended up with a special formatter to make sure that your output was always the same because you had like some set of related commands that produced? No, just me? Okay, so most of the time, when I worked, we don't have to go back in that time, but I usually end up in the case where I want to make sure that even as I'm executing multiple commands or multiple actions, that the feedback I'm giving to my users is consistent, right? You want it to look the same. Maybe I'm using a consistent checkbox for OK, or I'm using a consistent X, or maybe I decide I don't want a checkbox, I want a rocket ship. But it's consistent, it applies throughout the UI. So one of the things that I created was a text user interface, TUI. This is doing some bridging between some of the magic that Pico CLI does for me. It handles ANSI encoding detection. Does this terminal even support ANSI? If I have ANSI code, it'll add the ANSI codes or strip the ANSI codes, depending on whether or not the environment that I'm in supports it, which is great, because if you've tried writing ANSI codes, you lose your brains. So I like that it does that for me. It's got the color scheme for me. There's some things that I'm doing at boot, like, boot time in case I'm not actually in Pico CLI, and then to tie myself to those, the IO systems that Pico CLI has established. And then I have some consistent things to help me format my output consistently for debug statements, whether or not I'm emitting additional verbose information. I've got a little yellow warning diamond for warnings and a red stop sign for errors. And we'll see more pop in maybe later over time. And here's where I set those options though. So you can see with these two options for debug and brief, I have a scope type inherit on those two, which means when I create additional commands, which I will, you'll see them in a second, when I create the additional subcommands, those options show up there also. So all of my commands, the whole flotilla that doesn't exist yet, they all have brief and debug options super consistently. Same short, same long, same behavior. I'm setting it all up here. I have established that my pockets command is just going to show the usage in return, because what's going to happen instead is I'm going to have this create command, which doesn't do anything yet, and it's going to be the one that does stuff. So I have my command showing output. At this point, these tests are running, they're showing output. So when I execute the command without any parameters now, I get my text message. If you remember, it's not my text message, it's not my daughter texting me this time. What have you got in your pockets is the header, so that's right there. And it's got my usage statement for pockets. It's showing my brief debug option and then the help and the version information that were baked in. And I didn't actually have to write, I did write code. I write that whole TUI class, but that was me trying to make sure that my output's consistent. And there are some things that I'm doing here to show, in order to get my text interface, like what I'm trying to do, hooked up early enough, I had to override some of Quarkus's magic. So I'm getting here, I'm creating the command line myself because I want sister to not have to care about uppercase or lowercase. So I'm saying case sensitive behavior, please. And then I'm setting an execution strategy, which is in what order do I execute things. And I'm using that execution strategy is right here. You can see I'm saying use that method, please. And it's saying, let me initialize myself. I have the parse result, which means I have all of the arguments for whatever command it is parsed already. So for this command or any subcommand, I got all the arguments and everything. I've got brief, I've got verbose, I've got whatever else I need to know. I can use that to initialize that TUI class so it knows if it's brief or verbose mode. And then I have a place where I can shut down some things and then return the result. So if I step forward in time again, so you don't have to watch me type again, we can go back to what create does. Here's, I can see I'm calling my create command a C. With a longer alias of create, it's going to create a new pocket. Okay, that's great. If I look at the help, the normal help has this create method in it. Now it's not doing anything. Well, the reason it's not doing anything is because there's a whole bunch of other stuff I need to tell you about. Like, what is a pocket, Erin? Okay, well, let's go look at what a pocket is. So we have a few things here to establish pockets. This is some JPA, some panache. Wave, everybody say, well, hello, panache. So I have three things. One is I have a quick set of indexes. And this index is basically hardcore JSON stuff that defines pockets. Because we have well-known kinds of pockets, like a bag of holding. It has attributes. So we know what these pockets are. I don't want my sister to have to know all of these things or type them all in. Again, it's about making a usable CLI with sensible defaults. She should be able to say she's creating a backpack and it should just have the stuff. I shouldn't need my sister to go and fill in all the fields because who wants to do that? Nobody's got time. So we have an index that reads those JSON files, creates an index for me, and that way I can make it easier for her to create a Pocket. So that's one whole thing. We've got that. The other thing that we do is we have a Pocket class. This is an entity. I'm not going to type all the JPA things in, but this is an entity. Future me never remembers what the magic table name is. He's grinning. I never remember what, even though it's conventional and it should remember, future me never remembers and never trusts what was magically happening. So I always just set the stupid thing because then I don't have to think about it and future me is happier. So I just do that all the time. It's a weird habit I have. I blame being old. So I got attributes for my Pocket. I've got a name because I want her to be able to say whatever it is. I've got the name as a slug, which will make it easier for me to search and find it. I can be more forgiving. It's always lowercase. It doesn't have any funny characters. It just makes it easier for me to deal with. It has this Pocket ref thing. That's going to be a slug that points to that thing that I read from JSON that tells me what kind of Pocket it is. So that's great. It'll have how much the Pocket weighs, whether or not it's a super magical Pocket that has special rules about whether or not it cares about weight. And then because I have this slugify relationship where I want a slugified version of that name that I can use, I override the persist methods. These persist methods come from Panache. I wouldn't technically have to write them at all. But because they're there, I can say, oh, well, let me make sure that the rule that I am relying on, basically, that this slug field is the slugified version of the name, I can always do that as the last possible thing before I save it. So that way, in case future me does some boneheaded thing, or I let my sister change a name, or, I just prevent them from ever getting out of sync because it's a rule I rely on. So therefore, I make sure that it is maintained, I guess. And because I'm setting that slugified name, then I also add my own find by name string, my method, right? This is a Panache specialty. I just get to put it here as a static method. So I can do lookups by this name. And the first thing I do is slugify it. And then I can look for whether it starts with the query or if it matches the query. So I can start using regular expressions. My sister does not know regular expressions, but I totally do. So in the event that I have 50 million Pockets, I can totally use regular expressions to find the one that I care about. And that's how we'll do that. So that's the general gist with Pockets. So I think the next thing is probably trying to create some Pockets, right? So we're going to jump forward in time again. We're just going to leap. This is way better than you guys watching me type, I swear. So when we go now to create the Pocket, I think it should be blowing up Ness. Yes, it's blowing up. It's exploding. This was supposed to happen. This was on purpose. If we go up to where my test explodes, you notice it's just running my tests in the background, by the way. I'm just kind of scooting forward in time, and it's just running the increasing mass of tests that I have not been boring you guys with. But the tests are there, and one is failing. And you'll see it says context not active exception. The reason is because I'm in a CLI. When do you usually use transactions? In a server, which has a request, which has a request context, which I am definitely not there right now. I am in a CLI. So we have to do some tricks to put that context back. I'm going to cheat again because I don't remember anything and my brains are over there and they're dead. So we're just going to fast forward again. So if we go here, one of the things that we needed to do. So again, this is our Quarkus main. Quarkus is come here. It's going to look for our execute. What did I just do? Wow, now it remembered. It tried to connect to my iPad again. That's great. And it changed the resolution. I love this. This is so fun. So at least you're giggling with me. That's all I have to say. Laughing with me is great. So you can see that here is this run method. That's what Quarkus is going to end up trying to run. That's where I create my command line. And right above it, I can say, okay, right here is where I want you to activate the request context. So basically, the invocation of the CLI is the request. Makes sense? Totally doubt. That's fine. If we go to the create method, I now have this create method. It was doing something finally, which is why it barfed before, but now you can actually see what it really does when it works. I have the index coming in here. I have pocket attributes. What are pocket attributes? Let's get distracted for a second. Pocket attributes this is how I specify all of the options for my pockets, which means if I'm editing pockets, I can reuse all of these attributes. And you'll see these are just options. They're just the option annotation for names, volume, weight, magic, constraints, right? I can apply them to a pocket. So I'm doing like, what do I need to do to apply these values to a pocket? I can encapsulate that all there. And so here you'll see it as an argument group. I'll show you what that means in a moment. But notice that it is here as an argument group. I'll show you what it looks like in a second. I have a new command here that shows the type of pockets. That must have something to do with the index. Indeed it does. So here's how I specify the type of the pocket. Here's where I can list the types of pockets. And then I have a way for my sister to name the pocket. And I don't want her to remember that she has to use quotes. She can just type a bunch of words, and it's just, I will glom them all up, and I will make a nice name out of them so she doesn't have to, that thing when you remember, oh, I was supposed to quote those because those are actually one argument instead of several. It's like, yeah, she wins. She can just type, and it'll be great. So now in that call method, if I have the show types argument on, I'll list the pocket types and get out. Otherwise, I will try to find a pocket reference based on what you set. I will create the pocket based on that. I'll try to apply the attributes to it. So I'm using that one attributes class to go and apply all the attributes to the pocket. And then I persist it. And you notice now if I scroll down, my test passed. I feel like my text is now too big. Okay. My test now passed, and it's because the other thing that I added to this method is that it is now transactional. So that Quarkus main method, I started the context, which lasts for the duration. So who knows transactions in JPA and stuff, or is everybody like vomit? So that's what I just did. I just created the same JPA context and saved it with a nice transaction, all bounded around the invocation of the CLI. So if I scroll up a little, here's, again, the usage command now that I've added create as a subcommand. If I scroll up a little more, here's where the index started to come in. It's very, very faint. But it's the dev mode I have to talk to. The colors are terrible in light mode. They're even worse. So we're dealing with dark mode. There's just some very shaded stuff in there, some debug things. But I can tell that my pockets index is being read. Here is the display of help that I was going to show you. And I said, remember, it was an arg group, an argument group. So the attributes that were defined in that pocket attributes class are all grouped very nicely together in my help. And I didn't have to do that. It's doing all of the rendering and the spacing and all this stuff, right? And again, it's showing the usage with all of the arguments out there. It's got brief debug help. They were inherited. Types is added as an option that's unique to this command. So it shows up there. And so here's an output of the types command. So if I were to just, and I'll show you where these are all coming from too. I can show you that in a second. So when I issue pockets, create, because I'm in the create thing, and I do -- types, it shows me this nice list of pockets. So now my sister knows what she has to type. It's very important. So she knows what the options are. She can pick one. Most of the time, it'll be pouch or backpack. So I might soon have to tell her portable hole. That'll be awesome. I think it's going to be a portable hole, her next present. I don't know. I haven't quite decided yet. So the tests. Holly's here. I must talk about tests. She will come get me. So we did some cool things. I love having people in the audience whose names I know. It is really fun. Holly's like, oh my God, please stop. So when I was working on the Quarkus CLI, I started talking to Stuart about how we could make it easier to test CLI applications. Stuart is the person on our team that does all kinds of crazy cool stuff, including he's one of the drivers behind the whole cool dev experience that's happening in that terminal window in the background. And so when we have Quarkus test, which understands that you're trying to start a server or a long-running thing, and so it'll start it and it'll let you inject the port, and so then you can run all of the tests in your in your test class, and it makes it very easy to test something that's like a RESTful application. But that doesn't apply as well for a one and done situation where you're like the whole point of your thing is to do the thing and stop. So we created this other Quarkus main class thing, made this Quarkus main test. I prototyped this and I was really super happy when he pretty much took it the way it was. I was like, yes, I didn't mess it up. It's amazing. So Quarkus comes in, and if you see this first one, it's an annotation that says launch. And it basically runs the test and expects it to stop. So Quarkus main test is telling the Quarkus framework, all right, this is a test of Quarkus CLI applications. One way to do it is with an annotation that says launch. I can pass it parameters. I can also specify an exit code. So I could say this should exit, this should be a 2. Oh, I need a value then if I do that. And if I do this, it should hopefully fail, right? It's like, oh no, you were expecting, why is it the trace? But anyway, it expected 2, but it was 0. So it is implicitly this launch thing. It's implicitly assuming that you want a return code of 0. But if you're expecting another one, you can code it that way. But it makes it really easy for me to just, yes, please test my thing. Just run it with the options, give me the result, and then that's great. And that lets me do, like, I can test for my help output, make sure that it has usage commands. In the case of create, what I'm doing, here's the create for types. That's the one that generated that list. I can create a basket. I can create help. All of these things are happening silently in the background. And it's just running along. One of the things that it's using, this is using dev services, which if anybody was here earlier today, you heard mention of dev services. It is starting a data store for me. I need to close, I have too many things open. Shh, quiet. And be smaller by like this much so I can see. Dev services will read from an SQL, an import SQL file to pre-populate your database a little, which is really useful for tests, because then you know for each one of the methods what your starting state is. So you can really start playing with what it's trying to do. So I've got a couple values in here to create a pouch and a backpack and a haversack and another backpack, because you can't have one. And it just brings in some constants and stuff, which is what allows me then to write a test. Oops, where'd my test go? That's just, it's creating a new pocket. It's not doing anything really rocket sciencey at the moment. This one does run. I'll show you in a second. I'll get you some better output. Let's go forward in time. Let's just jump ahead. I don't remember what I was doing next. What was I doing next? Jumping ahead. We'll do that. All right. So we've created a pocket. We have CLI output that should be running things. But we need to start adding items to pockets, and you'll really start to see that I have list. In this last set of tests, I have another command that's running. I have a list command that's running. We'll show what that does in a second. Here's an example of my output for a new pocket named basket has been created. That's great. I think that was from earlier. Okay, but we're not quite there yet. So what do we need to do to add stuff to pockets? If we add stuff to pockets, we need to know what items are. Okay, so we need a couple things for this step to work properly. One is we need to know what items are. They have some standard attributes. Items need to belong to a pocket, so we have to set up that relationship. We also have an item reference, right? We had a pocket reference before, which is here's like the data that I read out of JSON for what pockets look like. We have a similar kind of thing for items. What are the attributes of an item? Are they rare? Are they interesting? I don't know, whatever. And so those items are in the index also. We already had that index object. I think I want to just skip to 8. We're just going super fast, which is fine. So in our item now, I have some more things. The item also needs to be an entity. You can see it's a Panache entity. I did my table, my entity name, table name trick again, because future me hates magic. I've got a many to one, really. This is where I'm establishing this relationship, this bidirectional relationship between pockets and items. So in the item, I'm saying it's many to one to a pocket. The join column is the pocket ID. And if we pull up the import SQL again, here's that pocket ID field. So that's the field that it's using to figure out the record from the other table. Sometimes that can be easier to understand. I have some bidirectional methods to help maintain this relationship. And the only thing to know here for people who are purists about who reaches into what, the pocket is the boss of this relationship. So I have convenient methods for an item to add it to a pocket, but it defers to the pocket. So the pocket's the boss of the relationship, and I can ask an item if it belongs to a pocket. I have the same persist methods here because, again, I have this pretty name to slugified name relationship that I need to maintain. And so then I have a very similar also find my name situation, although in the case of items, I'm only looking for items that are owned by a pocket, right? So I'm doing a little bit of scoping in terms of which items I'm looking for. Making an assumption about CLI use that says that this is going to drive me insane. Wait, that required that it assumed I was sane beforehand, right? Oh, it's fine. Whatever. It makes life interesting. So it's like, okay, you can work. But so I'm making the assumption, because my sister's using this, that like she's not going to want to look for just a knife. She's going to want to look for a knife in that pocket. I could get to the place where it's like, well, she could just really want a knife and not remember which pocket it's from, in which case I'll have to give her I would use a different lookup for that, I think is what I would do. And I'm not making it until she asks me for it. Important learning lesson for software, right? You guys all know best practice, right? You don't write the stuff first. Wait till you need it, then you write it. Okay, so if we go for adding an item, how do we do that? Okay, so we have item attributes. Oh, hey, those item attributes, I bet you are very similar to the pocket attributes. And sure enough, they are. And I have, it's more or less similar values, but slightly different. So I have item attributes as another argument group. I have the ID of the pocket, and I give my sister lots of clues and cues about what the pocket ID is, so she doesn't have to guess around too much. And I, again, let her just type ad nauseum for the name of the description. I do have... did I add that later? Oh, I hate when I do that. I think future me added additional code that's not here yet, so then I can't remember. So we'll just stay with what we have. So here I'm doing a couple things. I can find the pocket by the pocket ID. I'm going to return a not found if that item's not found. And you'll notice there's no qualifier on there, so that method's defined somewhere. I've got the item then. If I didn't find a pocket, if I found the pocket, I'm going to create the item, add the attributes. I definitely, future me, rewrote this code, and it's way better. So we assign the attributes, the value and gold pieces. We add the item to the pocket. We persist it. It's done. This is transactional. Everything gets saved. It did it again. All right, who's dying of the strobe? It's great. Totally. All right. What else can I teach you? I have 12 whole minutes. Can I talk for 12 minutes about CLIs when you can't see anything? I can. It's just, don't touch it. All right. So if I go, as you can see, 20 tests are running now. I've got more commands: list, create, delete, edit, update, add, remove, right? I got my CRUD operations for the pockets, and I've got additional operations that do not overlap verbs. There's no overlapping of verbs. So there's a set of verbs for working with pockets and a set of verbs for adding items and removing items from pockets, and they don't overlap. I've got, that's listing. So here's the coins is empty. It's showing some status of what happens when it's empty. You can almost barely see it. I don't know how to make it brighter. Can I make it brighter? Do I want to try to touch anything? I don't know. I don't know that I can make it brighter. It's very faint, but I've got my icons here. I've got cute emoji. Every pocket has its own cute emoji. There's a special little star if it's magical, so she can tell immediately that this is a magical special pocket, in case she did not know. I've got the ID there, so she always remembers what she's supposed to do, or which pocket if she needed a pocket. I can also, let's jump forward in time one more time, and then we'll just play around and see what happens. And I'll let you guys ask questions and heckle me. We'll see if future me fixed this code already. I don't think I did. So in this one, here's a set name or ID. This is when I started really changing. I've updated in the meanwhile, like how able she is to work with or specify these pockets. So she can either give me an ID, like a number, or she can start giving me names, and I'll try to find what it is that she's talking about. And I try to be as flexible with that as I can. I think most of the time I want the ID, the pocket as the ID, because I want her free form text, and then I try to find the item that she means that she's talking about. In the case of an update, I'm storing what the item attributes are. It went away again. We're just gonna talk. I'm done fighting with it. So we learned about Pico CLI. We learned about annotations, yes? Okay, so we learned that we can create commands, we can add subcommands, we can use options and argument groups to help create useful help. We can connect to, like Pico CLI will already do detection of ANSI sequences for colors. We can use emojis for feedback. We can control, we can set return codes. We can work with data stores. This will work just fine with cloud data sources if you would like to do that. There's nothing wrong with that. I happen to use one that was file-based. What else can we talk about? Give me a question. Yes, I'll code in the air.
There was a test code that was checking if the output contains a string. And my question is whether the whole output is cached inside that output memory.
I'll repeat the question.
When the command outputs too much text, whether it's crashing.
Yeah. I have never crashed it, so I don't actually know about that limit. But what I will say for the Quarkus main test, which we added, when you do that launch command, and I didn't even really show. There's two ways to launch tests. One is that launch annotation. And that launch annotation will then come back with a launch result, which is what you were looking at. That launch result does have the return code that came back, and it has the output from standard out and standard error. That is absolutely captured. You could absolutely blow it up if you emitted that much volume, but it's a CLI command. Do you really want to make your user page through that much data?
Well, if it's a build tool, for example, that is building a lot of modules.
Right. In which case, you probably also have a -q to be quiet, and you'd test that. You'd have a small output, and that, like, there are things that you do for test. In my case, because I have done this to myself, I usually will test. I'll have tests for help commands, and I will make sure that usage comes out, because there was that one time it was actually failing but was saying it was okay, and I didn't notice. So I do that because it's my own safety valve. So I just like to make sure usage, it does actually display the usage string. I didn't wander off into La La Land. So that launch annotation that you saw, that's one way to do it. We have another one, which is, oh God, what's it called? I don't remember. It's Quarkus something launcher thing with the stuff. And you do that in the method, and what it lets you do then is it also returns that same launch result, but that means I can launch several times within a method. Right, so the launch does, if you use the launch annotation, it launches and the thing finishes before the method starts. This other one lets you launch within the method. So if I have a sequence of commands that I want to test together, because it's supposed to do some sequence of things, and I don't want to reset up the directory or have the database reset in the case of dev services. So dev services is setting up that test data store for me, right? So if I want to test a couple things in a row, add the pocket, add the item to the pocket, update the item, delete the item. I can do all of that within the one method, and then the data set is reset for the next test. Does that answer your question?
Yes, perfectly. Thanks.
Great. What else? Come on, I got no screens.
Hi, thanks for the presentation, by the way. You mentioned not using overlapping verbs.
Yeah.
I didn't fully understand the point. Could you give a concrete example of what you mean?
Okay, it's hard for me to give you a concrete example off the thing, but what I try to get at is this actually applies to options also. When you're writing something kind of like, off the cuff, oh, I want to do this, and I want to do this, and I want to do this, and you kind of, if you just kind of go with the flow, you can end up with words that aren't clear enough about, like, if you think git clone, git commit, like, you know what those are. There's not a lot of, it's usually less with the actions that you have to think about that with. Those actions are usually fairly clear. It's options that usually get you into trouble because, like, oh, I'll just add this flag, and then I'll just add this flag, and then I'll just add this flag, and then you end up having to explain how those 5 flags are supposed to go together or not, and it gets really difficult. So for me, it's like, remember, humans are using this. Sit down, write the cases out, and you can probably actually drop a few if you plot out what you're doing and realize that some of the cases can't ever go together anyway, and then try to group them in a way that makes the most sense rather than just haphazardly throwing everything everywhere, was what I was trying to say. I can't think. When we revisited the Quarkus CLI for version 2, there are actually some commands that I haven't put back yet. I dropped a bunch of them on the floor, and I was like, you don't actually need those. Or we'll wait until how we want to do that becomes a little more clear. One of the things I want to fix, for example, with the Quarkus CLI that I haven't gotten to yet, is trying to resolve all of the various properties that you need to build a native container. We have a native flag. You can do Quarkus build with a native flag and it'll do a number of things. But there's still way more options that can be difficult to navigate. And so trying to really be deliberate about the actions and the options so that they are clear and they don't, that you're not muddying the water. That was more what I was talking about. And it's an art form. And I've written a whole bunch of stuff that really sucks. So I'm not trying to say that I'm good at it. It's just something you should think about. Anything else? It was Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition. Nobody asked. I'm upset. That's a long story. I do recommend, I did not ever plan to be a Dungeons and Dragons nerd. It was totally accidental. But I do, if you have adult siblings, I do totally recommend that you do something like this with your siblings. Spending every Sunday talking with my sister is amazing. So I highly recommend it. What? Talk to me. I think we're good. And actually, we're time. 3 minutes. So come talk to me. Have fun. Have a good rest of the day. If you don't want to talk to me, it's fine. I'm scary. It's good. Thanks.